The war had lasted for 347 years, and the Galactic Coalition was losing. Ambassador Kethro stood before the viewing window of his diplomatic vessel, watching the distant stars burn with a sadness that ran deeper than any creature should feel. His crystalline body caught the light of dying suns and scattered it across the walls of his chamber in fragments of blue and violet. And he thought about how many of those lights represented worlds that no longer existed. The Vreth Dominion had taken everything from them. World after world, species after species, hope after hope, until nothing remained but the desperate clinging to survival that defined the Coalition's existence. Now Kethro belonged to the Solori, one of the oldest species in the known galaxy. His people had existed for millions of years, building civilizations of beauty and wisdom, creating art and philosophy that lesser species could barely comprehend. They had believed themselves above the primitive concerns of violence and conquest, and that belief had cost them 17 worlds in Kethral's lifetime alone. He turned away from the window as his assistant entered the chamber. "Ambassador, the High Council has reached a decision," the young Solori said, a crystal form flickering with nervousness. "They wish to proceed with the contact mission." Kethral felt something cold settle in what served as his heart. The council had debated for months about the new species discovered at the edge of the galaxy, and he had hoped they would choose caution over desperation. But desperation was all they had left now. "Tell them I will accept the mission," he said quietly. The journey to the edge of known space took 3 weeks, and Kethral spent most of that time studying everything the Coalition knew about the species called humans. They were young, terrifyingly, impossibly young. While the Solori had spent millions of years evolving into beings of pure crystal and light, these humans had gone from primitive animals to spacefaring civilization in less than 200,000 years. It was a speed of development that defied all known models of evolution and progress. They were also violent. The intelligence reports made that abundantly clear. Humans had spent their entire existence fighting each other in conflicts of ever-increasing scale and destruction. They had developed weapons capable of destroying their own world before they had even left their home planet. What kind of species did that, Kethral wondered. What kind of madness drove a people to build tools of extinction before they had even reached the stars? But the Coalition was out of options. 12 species had united against the Vreth 3 centuries ago, and in that time they had lost more than they had gained. The Vreth were relentless, their insectoid biology allowing them to reproduce in numbers that no other species could match. For every Vreth warrior the Coalition killed, 10 more took its place. It was a war of attrition that could only end one way unless someone changed the rules of the game. The human homeworld appeared on Kethral's sensors like a blue jewel floating in the darkness of space. It was beautiful in a way that surprised him, all swirling clouds and vast oceans. But as he drew closer, he saw the scars beneath the beauty. The atmosphere carried traces of nuclear fallout from wars fought generations ago. The oceans held remnants of chemical weapons and industrial pollution. This world had suffered at the hands of its own children. What struck him most was the activity. Thousands of satellites orbited the planet, more than any species should need. Ships moved constantly between the world and its single moon. Communication signals flooded every frequency with a chaos of languages and data. These humans never stopped, never rested, never paused for contemplation. His vessel was intercepted long before he reached the planet. Unknown vessel. Identify yourself immediately. A voice crackled through his communication system in a language his translator struggled to parse. You have entered restricted space. Failure to comply will result in defensive action. Kethral transmitted his diplomatic credentials and waited. The response came faster than he expected. Ambassador, you are cleared for approach. A military escort will guide you to the designated landing zone. Do not deviate from the assigned course. Military escort, Kethril noted. Not a diplomatic greeting or a scientific delegation. The humans sent warriors to meet him. The landing was smooth, and Kethril emerged from his vessel into a world of noise and movement that overwhelmed his senses. Humans surrounded him, soldiers in armor that looked crude but functional, their eyes watching him with expressions he could not read. They did not seem afraid, which surprised him. Most species showed fear when encountering the unknown. A female human stepped forward, her posture radiating authority that needed no translation. Ambassador Kethril of the Silori, she said, and her pronunciation of his name was nearly perfect. I am General Sarah Chun. Welcome to Earth. Kethril inclined his crystalline form in greeting. General Chun, I come bearing a message of great importance from the Galactic Coalition. I request an audience with your world's leaders. The general smiled, but it was not a warm expression. It reminded Kethril of something predatory, something hungry. You traveled a long way to deliver a message, Ambassador. The United Nations Security Council is already assembled and waiting. Whatever you have to say must be important. They already knew. Somehow, these primitive humans had anticipated his arrival and prepared accordingly. Kethril felt the first stirring of something he had not experienced. In a very long time, it took him a moment to recognize it as hope. The chamber they brought him to was vast and filled with humans from every nation on their divided world. Kethril had studied their politics and knew that these people rarely agreed on anything, that they spent most of their time arguing among themselves. But today they sat in unified silence, watching him with eyes that held no fear. He told them everything. He told them about the Vreth, about their hive minds and their endless hunger for conquest. He showed them images of worlds consumed, of species driven to extinction, of the horror that had spread across the galaxy for 3 centuries. He explained how the Coalition had fought and bled and died for generations, how they had tried everything they knew and still they were losing. When he finished, the chamber was silent. Kethril waited for the questions he expected. The debates about whether intervention was wise. The philosophical discussions about the nature of violence and the morality of war. Instead, a human male in military uniform stood and asked, what are their fleet numbers? Another asked, what weapons do they use? A third, where are their supply lines? These were not the questions of philosophers debating the ethics of intervention. These were the questions of predators studying their prey. General Chun leaned forward in her seat, her eyes fixed on the holographic map Kethril had projected. Show us their homeworld, she said. Kethril hesitated. General, the Vreth homeworld is deep within enemy territory. No coalition force has ever attempted to strike it. The defenses are too strong, the distance too great. It would be suicide. Chun exchanged glances with the other military leaders, and something passed between them that Kethril could not understand. Some form of silent communication born from shared experience. Ambassador, Chun said slowly, as if explaining something to a child. You've been fighting this war for 347 years. Generations have been born and died in this conflict. And in all that time, you never once tried to end it. Kethril felt confusion ripple through his crystalline form. We have tried many strategies, General. Defensive positions, counterattacks, diplomatic negotiations. But you never went for the kill, Chun interrupted, and her voice had turned cold. You never hit them where it actually mattered. You've been playing defense for 3 centuries, while they slowly eat you alive. The chamber erupted in murmured agreement. And Kethril realized with growing unease that every human in this room was thinking the same thing. They were not debating whether to help. They were planning how to win. Show us the homeworld, Chine repeated. And this time, it was not a request. Kethril transmitted the coordinates. And as he watched the humans study the data with hungry eyes, He understood something that would haunt him for the rest of his very long life. He had come to Earth seeking allies. He had found something far more dangerous. The humans did not waste time with ceremony or celebration. Within hours of Kethral's presentation to the United Nations, the entire planet had begun to transform in ways that defied everything the ambassador understood about how civilizations functioned. Messages flew across their global networks at impossible speeds, and governments that had spent decades arguing with each other suddenly began working together with a coordination that seemed almost supernatural. Kethral watched from the observation deck of a military facility as human soldiers moved in perfect formations below. They carried weapons that looked brutal and ugly, designed not for elegance, but for the simple purpose of ending lives as efficiently as possible. Everything about human technology had that same quality, a ruthless focus on function over form that made the ambassador deeply uncomfortable general. Chun found him there as the sun began to set over the human city. "You seem troubled." "Ambassador," she said, standing beside him with her hands clasped behind her back. "I am trying to understand your people," Kethral admitted. In the coalition, a decision of this magnitude would require months of debate. Committees would be formed. Studies would be conducted. Philosophers would argue about the ethical implications. You have known about the Vreth for less than a day, and already your entire world moves as one. Chun smiled that predatory smile again. "We have a saying on Earth. Ambassador, when the house is on fire, you do not form a committee to discuss the best color for the fire extinguisher. But how do you achieve such unity so quickly? Your species is famous for its internal conflicts. You fight each other constantly." "We do," Chun agreed. "We fight over resources, over territory, over ideas and beliefs, and things that matter only to us. But when something threatens all of us, when an enemy appears that does not care about our differences, we remember what we are. We remember that before we were nations and tribes and factions, we were survivors." She turned to face him directly, and Kethral saw something in her eyes that he recognized from ancient Silori records, from the time before his people had evolved beyond such primitive emotions. It was the look of a predator that had just found worthy prey. "The Vreth have been killing your people for centuries," Chum said quietly. "They have destroyed worlds and consumed entire species. And now you tell us they know about Earth, that eventually they will come for us too." "That is correct," Kethral confirmed. "Their expansion is inevitable. They will reach human space within the next century. Then we have a choice," Chum said. "We can wait for them to come to us, fight a defensive war on our own territory, while they burn our worlds and eat our children. Or we can go to them first, hit them before they expect it, and end this war before it ever reaches Earth. The Coalition has tried offensive operations." Kethral protested. "They always fail. The Vreth have too many warriors, too many ships. The Coalition tries to fight fair," Chun interrupted. "We have watched your battle records, Ambassador. Your admirals are brilliant strategists who follow rules and conventions and codes of conduct. They wage war like it is a game with agreed-upon boundaries." She leaned closer, and her voice dropped to something that was almost a growl. "War is not a game. It is not about honor or fairness or following rules. War is about breaking your enemy so completely that they can never threaten you again. And that, Ambassador, is something humans understand better than any species in this galaxy." The next few days were a blur of activity that left Kethral exhausted, and overwhelmed human engineers swarmed over his diplomatic vessel, studying the Coalition's faster-than-light drive technology with an intensity that bordered on obsession. Within 48 hours, they had not only understood the principles behind it, but had begun modifying it to suit their own purposes. The changes they made horrified Coalition scientists who observed remotely. They have removed the safety limiters, a Cellori physicist reported with obvious distress. The drives could tear themselves apart under that kind of strain. Will they work? Catherall asked, theoretically. Yes, but the risk. Will they work faster? The physicist hesitated. Significantly faster, yes. But no responsible engineer would ever. The humans are not interested in responsibility, Catherall said, and he felt a strange mix of fear and admiration. They are interested in results. He attended a meeting of human military leaders and found himself listening to discussions that would have been unthinkable in the coalition. They talked about acceptable casualty rates with cold efficiency, calculating exactly how many of their own people they were willing to sacrifice to achieve victory. They debated weapon systems that the Galactic Accords had banned centuries ago, dismissed the laws of civilized warfare as obstacles to be ignored, rather than principles to be upheld. When Catherall tried to explain the Accords of Mutual Preservation, the room fell silent. Let me make sure I understand, a human admiral said slowly. Your galaxy has rules that limit what weapons can be used in war? Of course, Catherall replied. Civilized species do not use weapons of mass destruction. We do not target civilian populations. We accept surrenders and treat prisoners with dignity. These are the foundations of ethical warfare. The humans looked at each other, and several of them laughed. It was not a kind sound, Ambassador, General Chun said. The Vreth do not follow your rules. They destroy everything in their path without discrimination. They do not take prisoners. They take food. You're civilized. Warfare has been losing for 3 centuries. But if we abandon our principles, what separates us from them? Victory, Chun said simply. Victory separates us. The dead have no principles, Ambassador. The extinct have no ethics. Survival comes first, and everything else comes after. She stood and addressed the room. Begin. Fleet mobilization. I want every ship capable of carrying a weapon ready to launch within 72 hours. Coordinate with coalition observers to install FTL drives on all vessels. And start loading the special ordnance. Catherall felt ice spread through his crystalline form. Special ordnance? Chun looked at him with something that might have been pity. Nuclear weapons. Ambassador, antimatter warheads, kinetic impactors. Everything we have ever built to destroy each other, we are now going to use on the Vreth. These weapons are prohibited by laws the Vreth never signed and humans never agreed to follow. Chun finished. Your coalition invited us to this war, Ambassador. You asked for our help. Now you will see how humans wage war. She turned to leave, then paused at the door. I suggest you stay on Earth during the operation. What happens next will be difficult for species like yours to witness. We do not fight with honor or restraint. We fight to win. And we do not stop until our enemies can never threaten us again. As she walked away, Catherall understood that he had made a terrible mistake. He had thought the Vreth were monsters, the greatest threat the galaxy had ever known. But watching humanity prepare for war, watching them mobilize their entire civilization with cold efficiency and arm themselves with weapons designed for genocide, he realized the truth. The Vreth were merely predators doing what predators do. Humans were something else entirely. They were killers who had spent their entire existence perfecting the art of destruction, who had turned warfare into a science and violence into an industry. They had invented weapons that could crack planets and poisons that could end species, and they had done it to use against each other. Now all of that terrible creativity, all of that ruthless ingenuity was pointed at a single target, and Catherall found himself pitying the Vreth. The fleet assembled in orbit around Earth like a swarm of angry wasps, and Ambassador Catherall watched from a coalition observation station with a mixture of awe and horror that he could not separate. 2,000 ships hung in the darkness of space, ranging from massive carrier vessels to small, fast attack craft that darted between the larger ships like predatory fish. They were ugly things by galactic standards, all hard angles and exposed weaponry, built without any concern for aesthetic beauty. But there was something terrifying about their brutality, something that spoke of a species that had never known peace coalition. Observers had estimated that mobilizing a fleet of this size would take humans at least 6 months. They had done it in 3 days. Admiral James Morrison stood on the bridge of the flagship, a massive vessel that the humans had named Extinction. Catherall had learned that humans often named their weapons after death and destruction, as if declaring their intentions to the universe itself. It was not a comforting trait. "Ambassador," Morrison said without turning from the tactical display, "I understand you requested permission to accompany the fleet." Catherall moved forward, his crystalline form catching the harsh lights of the bridge. "I did, Admiral. The Coalition must witness what happens. We need to understand. Understand what exactly? How you fight. What you are willing to do. My people have never seen warfare like this, and I believe we need to see it with our own eyes." Morrison finally turned to look at him, and his expression was unreadable. "You might not like what you see, Ambassador. We are not going to fight the way your coalition fights. There will be no measured responses, no proportional force, no consideration for collateral damage. I know. Do you?" Morrison asked, and his voice carried a weight that made Catherall's crystal structure vibrate. "The Vreth have existed as a spacefaring civilization for 10,000 years. They have conquered hundreds of worlds and enslaved dozens of species. In 5 hours, we are going to end them. Not defeat them, not push them back, not negotiate a treaty. We are going to end them as a civilization, as a species, as a threat. Do you really want to watch that happen?" Catherall thought about the 17 Silori, worlds that had fallen in his lifetime. He thought about the billions of his people who had died screaming as Vreth warriors consumed them alive. He thought about the endless horror of 3 centuries of war that had accomplished nothing but delay the inevitable. "Yes," he said. "I want to watch." Morrison nodded slowly. "Then welcome aboard, Ambassador. I hope you have a strong stomach." The fleet jumped into FTL travel simultaneously, 2,000 ships vanishing from Earth orbit in a flash of light that sensors across the solar system detected and recorded. It was the largest military operation in human history, and it had come together in less than a week. Catherall spent the journey studying human history, trying to understand the species that was about to change the galaxy forever. What he found disturbed him deeply. Humans had been waging war on each other for as long as they had existed. Their earliest ancestors had fought with rocks and sticks, and as their technology advanced, their weapons had advanced with it. Every tool they invented seemed to find a military application. Every discovery became a new way to kill. They had developed nuclear weapons and actually used them, dropped them on cities full of their own kind, killed hundreds of thousands of civilians in seconds, and they had done it twice. More than that, they had come within moments of destroying their entire planet multiple times. Cold wars and nuclear standoffs had brought them to the brink of extinction, and they had stepped back only at the last moment. It was as if they were addicted to the edge of the abyss, constantly testing how close they could come to total annihilation without falling. But what truly horrified Catherall was how they had responded to those brushes with extinction. They had not become more peaceful. They had become more efficient. Each war taught them new lessons. Each conflict refined their methods. They developed precision weapons and surgical strikes, learned to wage war with minimum casualties to their own forces while maximizing damage to their enemies. They created doctrines and strategies, turned the chaos of violence into something that could be studied and perfected. The Coalition had always seen war as a failure of civilization. A breakdown of order that should be avoided whenever possible. Humans saw it as a tool, something to be mastered and wielded like any other instrument of power. General Chun found him in his quarters as the fleet approached. Breath space, having second thoughts. Ambassador? She asked. I am trying to reconcile what I know about your species with what I see around me, Kethril admitted. You are capable of great art and philosophy, of compassion and creativity. Your music moves me in ways I did not know were possible. And yet you are also capable of this. He gestured at the walls of the ship, at the weapon systems that hummed with barely contained energy. We are complicated, Chan agreed. We love and we hate, we create and we destroy, we build and we burn. We are not a species of philosophers who have evolved beyond violence. We are still the same predatory apes who climbed down from the trees and learned to make fire. Does that not trouble you? Sometimes, Chun admitted. But right now, in this moment, our nature is exactly what the galaxy needs. The Vreth are a threat that cannot be reasoned with, cannot be negotiated with, cannot be deterred through fear of consequences. They understand only one thing, strength. And strength is something humans have in abundance. The alert klaxon sounded throughout the ship, and Chun's expression hardened into something cold and focused. We are approaching the target zone, she said. The attack begins in 30 minutes. If you want to watch, come to the observation deck. But I warn you again, Ambassador, what you are about to see will change how you think about everything. Kethril followed her through the corridors of the ship, passing human soldiers who moved with a quiet efficiency that seemed almost mechanical. They did not joke or laugh or show fear. They simply prepared for what was coming with the calm professionalism of experts at their craft. The observation deck was a large chamber with transparent walls that showed the stars streaming past as the ship traveled faster than light. Kethril took his position and waited, watching as the countdown continued. When the fleet emerged from FTL travel, they were directly above the Vreth throne world, the heart of an empire that had terrorized the galaxy for millennia. Below them, a planet teemed with billions of Vreth, their cities covering the surface like a disease, their ships filling the orbital space in numbers that would have made any Coalition Admiral despair. Morrison's voice came over the ship-wide communication system, calm and steady. All ships. This is Admiral Morrison. Commence Operation Final Dawn. No mercy, no quarter, no survivors. For Earth and humanity. The human fleet opened fire, and the universe changed forever. The first hour was chaos. Ambassador Kethril had witnessed battle before, had watched coalition fleets engage Vreth forces in carefully orchestrated conflicts that followed predictable patterns. But this was nothing like those measured engagements. This was violence on a scale that his mind struggled to process. Human ships tore through the Vreth, defensive perimeter like predators through a herd of prey, their weapons firing in continuous streams of destruction that lit up the darkness of space with blinding fury. They did not pause to assess damage or regroup or consider tactical withdrawals. They simply advanced, always forward, always firing, always killing. The Vreth were caught completely off guard. Their doctrine was built around the assumption that enemies would approach cautiously, probe their defenses, look for weaknesses before committing to an assault. No species was insane enough to jump directly into the heart of enemy territory with no fallback position, no escape route, no margin for error. But the humans had done exactly that. They are confused. General Chun observed from beside Kethril, watching the tactical display with professional interest. Their command structure is not designed for this kind of shock. They are trying to coordinate a response, but we are not giving them time to think. On the display, Kethril could see Vreth ships exploding by the dozens as human weapons found their marks. The insectoid vessels were not designed for this kind of close-range combat, built instead for the slow, grinding wars of attrition that had defined their expansion. They were massive and heavily armored, but also slow and clumsy compared to the smaller, faster human craft. "Your ships are taking damage," Catherall noted, watching several human vessels disappear from the display. "We expected that," Chun replied without emotion. "Acceptable losses." The crews knew what they were signing up for. Acceptable losses. The phrase echoed in Catherall's mind. Human commanders calculated how many of their own people would die and decided it was worth it. They sent soldiers into battle knowing some would never return, and they did so without hesitation. It was a coldness that the coalition had never been able to match. The second hour brought the bombardment, with the Vreth defensive fleet in disarray. Human ships took up positions in orbit around the throne world and began raining destruction on the surface below. Kinetic impactors, simple metal rods accelerated to incredible speeds, struck Vreth cities with the force of nuclear weapons. Actual nuclear weapons detonated in the upper atmosphere, creating electromagnetic pulses that fried technology across entire continents. Antimatter warheads carved craters into the planet's surface that could be seen from space. Catherall watched in horror as cities that had existed for thousands of years vanished in seconds. Their populations erased as if they had never been. The Vreth were monsters, yes, but there were civilians down there. Children, beings who had never raised a weapon in their lives. "Is this necessary?" he asked. His voice barely a whisper. Chun looked at him, and for a moment you thought he saw something like understanding in her eyes. The Vreth reproductive system is based on queens. They lay millions of eggs, and within a generation, those eggs become warriors. If we leave any significant population alive, they will rebuild. They will reproduce. They will come for revenge. Total victory requires total elimination of their ability to wage war. But the innocent, there are no innocent Vreth, Chun said, and her voice carried absolute conviction. Every adult contributes to the hive. Every child will grow to be a warrior. Every queen exists only to produce more soldiers. Their entire civilization is a machine designed for conquest. You cannot negotiate with a machine, Ambassador. You can only break it. The bombardment continued, and Catherall forced himself to watch. The third hour was the invasion human. Dropships descended through the burning atmosphere of the Vreth throne world, carrying millions of soldiers in powered armor that made them look like metallic giants. They landed in the ruins of cities, advancing through the destruction with weapons that blazed continuous fire into any Vreth that moved. Catherall had access to ground-level feeds from human combat cameras, and what he saw there was worse than the orbital bombardment. Human soldiers fought with a ferocity that matched the Vreth themselves, but combined with a tactical coordination that the insectoids could not match. They moved in units that supported each other perfectly, laying down covering fire while their comrades advanced, calling in airstrikes and artillery with precision that seemed almost supernatural. The Vreth were apex predators, their biology optimized for killing through millions of years of evolution. But humans had something the Vreth did not have: adaptability. When one tactic failed, they switched to another. When a weapon proved ineffective, they found a different approach. They learned and adjusted in real time, sharing information across their forces instantly, and they were enjoying it. Catherall could hear human soldiers talking to each other over the communication channels, and their voices carried something that disturbed him deeply. They were excited. They were thrilled. Some of them were laughing as they killed. This was not a burden they carried with reluctance. This was what they had been born to do. The fourth hour was the hunt. Vreth Command had finally organized a response, pulling their queens and leadership into a heavily fortified bunker deep beneath the surface of the planet. Human intelligence had anticipated this, And specialized teams had been preparing for exactly this moment. They called themselves Marines. And they were the most terrifying soldiers Kethril had ever seen. They descended into the tunnels beneath the Wrath capital, fighting through thousands of warrior drones that threw themselves at the invaders in desperate waves. The fighting was brutal and close, conducted in narrow corridors where advanced technology meant less than raw courage and willingness to kill. Kethril watched a Marine sergeant fight 3 Wrath warriors simultaneously, using a combination of firearm, blade, and bare hands that should not have been possible. She killed all 3, took a wound that would have crippled most species, and kept advancing. How can they do this? Kethril asked. How can beings of flesh and blood fight like that? Training, Chun replied. Discipline. A refusal to accept defeat. And something we call spite. When a human decides they will not lose, when they commit themselves fully to victory, they become something more than their biology would suggest. It is not logical, not rational, but it is very, very human. The 5th hour was the ending. Human forces breached the final bunker and found themselves face to face with the Wrath Queen Mother, the supreme ruler of an empire that had terrorized the galaxy for 10,000 years. She was massive, her bloated body filling most of the chamber. Surrounded by her final guards and the last of her royal offspring, she broadcast a surrender on all frequencies, offering terms, promising to withdraw from Coalition space. Pleading for mercy, Admiral Morrison received the transmission on the Bridge of the Extinction. And Kethril watched his face as he listened. Admiral, a communications officer said, the Wrath Queen is requesting terms of surrender. Shall I open a channel for negotiations? Morrison was silent for a long moment, and when he spoke, his voice was cold. Denied. Continue the operation. No survivors. The Marines advanced into the throne room, and the last thing the Wrath Queen Mother saw was human soldiers raising their weapons. The war that had lasted 347 years ended in 300 minutes when it was over. When the last Wrath Queen had been killed and the last hive had been destroyed, the human fleet gathered in orbit around the world that was now little more than a burning tomb. Smoke and ash rose from the surface, and the once great cities were nothing but craters and rubble. Admiral Morrison addressed the fleet over the ship-wide communication system. To all human forces, mission accomplished. The Wrath Dominion is no more. Begin recovery operations and prepare for the journey home. You have earned your rest. The cheering that followed echoed through every ship in the fleet, and Kethril stood in silence, trying to process what he had witnessed. 5 hours. In 5 hours, humans had done what the Coalition could not do in 3 centuries. They had ended an existential threat, eliminated a species that had seemed unconquerable, and changed the balance of power in the galaxy forever. But as he watched the celebration around him, as he saw humans embracing and laughing and crying with relief, Kethril felt no joy. He felt only fear because he understood now what humanity truly was. And he knew that the galaxy would never be the same. The galaxy did not celebrate when news of the Wrath Dominion's destruction spread across Coalition space. Ambassador Kethril expected relief and gratitude. After 347 years of war, the enemy was gone, destroyed so completely that not a single queen remained to rebuild their civilization. It should have been the greatest victory in galactic history. Instead, there was silence. The Coalition High Council convened an emergency session within hours of the human fleet's return to Earth. And Kethril found himself standing before the assembled representatives of 12 species, each of them looking at him with expressions he recognized all too well. They were afraid. Ambassador Kethril, the Silori High Counselor, began, her crystalline form flickering with barely contained anxiety. Your report on the human military operation has been distributed to all member species. The reactions have been unanimous. She paused, and the silence stretched until it became unbearable. We are concerned. Kethril inclined his body in acknowledgement. I understand, High Counselor. I share your concerns. Do you? Another counselor demanded, a massive being from the Korath species, whose rocky hide seemed to tremble with agitation. You witnessed the destruction of an entire civilization in a matter of hours. You watched these humans commit acts of violence that violate every principle the Coalition was founded upon. And you did nothing to stop them. What would you have had me do? Kethril asked quietly. They were saving us. They were doing what we could not do for 3 centuries. Was I supposed to demand they fight with one hand behind their backs while our people continued to die? You were supposed to ensure they followed the Accords, the Korath counselor growled. The Accords exist to prevent exactly this kind of barbarism. Weapons of mass destruction, genocide, the refusal to accept surrender. These humans violated every law of civilized warfare. The Vreth violated those laws first, Kethril pointed out. They never signed the Accords. They never showed mercy. They consumed our people without regard for any principle except their own hunger. We invited the humans to fight monsters, and we should not be surprised that they fought like monsters. The chamber erupted in arguments. Voices rising as representatives debated what the human victory meant for the future of the galaxy. Some argued that humanity should be welcomed into the Coalition as full members, rewarded for their service. Others demanded that they be isolated, quarantined on their own world before they could turn. Their terrible weapons against someone else. Kethril listened to it all, and felt a deep weariness settle into his ancient form. He had written his report during the long journey back from the Vreth World, trying to put into words what he had witnessed. It had taken him days to find the right language, to capture both the horror and the necessity of what the humans had done. The final version had been short, because some truths did not need elaborate explanation. The report concluded with a single recommendation that had caused more debate than anything else he had ever written. Do not give the humans a reason to view us as enemies. Ever, under any circumstances. They do not fight wars the way we do. They do not understand limited engagements or proportional responses or acceptable losses. When humans go to war, they do not seek victory. They seek extinction. We are fortunate they consider us friends. We must ensure it stays that way because the galaxy has just learned a terrible truth. There are worse things than the Vreth. They are humans. The debate continued for hours, and eventually the council reached a decision that satisfied no one but represented the only path forward, that all species could accept humanity, would be welcomed as a coalition member, given full rights and responsibilities within the galactic community. They would be treated with respect and friendship, their contribution to the war honored and remembered. But quietly, secretly, every species would begin preparing for a future that might require defending themselves against their new allies. It was not trust. It was managed fear. And Kethril suspected the humans would see through it immediately. General Chun was waiting for him when he returned to Earth, standing in the same military facility where they had first met. She looked tired but satisfied. The weight of command temporarily lifted from her shoulders. I read your report, she said without preamble. The part about us being worse than the Vreth. That was harsh. Kethril met her gaze without flinching. It was accurate, Chime laughed, and the sound was surprisingly genuine. Yes, I suppose it was. We are not nice people, Ambassador. We have never pretended to be. But we are effective, and sometimes effective is what the galaxy needs. The Coalition is afraid of you now. Good, Chum said, and there was no apology in her voice. Fear keeps the peace. As long as they are afraid of what we might do, they will not give us a reason to do it. That is how humans have maintained stability among ourselves for generations. Mutual fear, mutual destruction. The promise that any aggression will be met with overwhelming retaliation. That seems like a fragile foundation for peace. All peace is fragile. Ambassador. The only question is what holds it together. Love and understanding are wonderful ideals, but fear and self-interest are more reliable. We learned that lesson the hard way, through centuries of war and near-extinction events. Now the galaxy gets to learn it too. She turned to look out the window at the city beyond, at the millions of humans going about their lives unaware of how the galaxy viewed them. We saved your coalition, Chun said quietly. We ended a war that had killed trillions and would have killed trillions more. We did it in 5 hours, and we did it by being exactly what we are. Violent, ruthless, and utterly unwilling to accept defeat. Your people can hate us for that if they want, but they will also sleep safely because of it. Catherall stood beside her, watching the sun set over the human city, painting the sky in shades of red and gold. What happens now? He asked. Now we wait, Chun replied. We have shown the galaxy what humans are capable of. Every species out there is recalculating their understanding of power and threat. Some will want to be our friends, hoping to share in our strength. Others will fear us and try to find ways to contain us. A few will see us as a threat to be eliminated before we grow too powerful. And how will humans respond to those who see you as a threat? Chum smiled, and it was the same predatory expression she had worn when he first met her. The look of someone who had already calculated every possible outcome and found them all acceptable. The same way we always respond. Ambassador. We will try to make peace first. We will offer friendship and cooperation and the chance to build something better together. But if they refuse, if they decide that humanity must be destroyed before we become too dangerous. She paused, and her eyes went cold. Then we will do to them what we did to the Vreth. And we will do it faster, because we will have learned from this experience. Humans always learn, Ambassador. Every war makes us better at war. It is perhaps our greatest curse, but it is also our greatest strength. The stars began to appear in the darkening sky. Countless points of light that represented worlds and civilizations that were now reconsidering everything they knew about the universe somewhere out there. Catherall knew. Species were watching humanity with new eyes. Some with hope, some with fear, all with the understanding that the galaxy had fundamentally changed. The Vreth had been a threat for 10,000 years. An empire of conquest and destruction that had seemed unstoppable. Humans had stopped them in 5 hours, and now the galaxy had to live with the consequences of inviting such a species to join them among the stars. Catherall looked at General Chun, at this small, fragile being who had commanded the destruction of an entire civilization without hesitation or remorse. And he understood something that would stay with him for the rest of his very long life. The humans were not evil. They were not cruel for the sake of cruelty. They were simply what evolution had made them, survivors. Every instinct, every adaptation, every cultural development had been shaped by the need to survive in a hostile universe. And they had survived everything, including themselves. Now they would help the galaxy survive too. Whether the galaxy wanted that help or not. Welcome to the coalition. General, Catherall said finally. I hope we never give you a reason to fight us. Chun's smile softened slightly, becoming almost warm. So do I, Ambassador. So do I. And in the darkness between the stars, the galaxy held its breath and waited to see what humanity would do next.